Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the cyber winter. That's what it's called, the cyber winter. What is the cyber winter? It's the next stage of cyber warfare. According to Yigal Unan, Israel's national cybersecurity chief, when we talk about cyber winter, we are not talking theoretically. We are already there. The war has begun. We have entered the new stage of cyber warfare. Una told Cyber Live Asia that cyber winter is coming, but he really was very conservative on that. This is his quote. Rapid is not something that describes enough how fast and how crazy and hectic things are moving forward in cyberspace. And I think we will remember this last month and May 2020 as a changing point in the history of modern cyber warfare. Una knows what he's talking about. Israel's its water system was attacked by cyber terrorists in late April. The attack was traced back to Iran. The plan was for attackers to change the chlorine content of Israel's water. According to an internal memo between the head of Israel's water department and the head of Israel's cybersecurity, Anan, the attack was repelled and Israel successfully defended itself. No damage was done. The memo ordered everyone to change their passwords, especially those in the chlorine control department. If that was not possible, they were instructed to remove themselves and take themselves and their system offline immediately. Had the attack not been thwarted, the damage to the water system would have been disastrous for Israel and for the entire region. It would have added exponentially to the crisis of coronavirus. Now, this is important to understand. This attack was extremely sophisticated. It penetrated deep into the system of Israel. Tracking the hackers was not easy, but in the end, it could have only been one of three major groups, sophisticated enough to carry out this kind of attack of this magnitude, and hateful enough of Israel to want to carry out an attack of this size. They are Iran, Russia, and China, and they're the military cyber groups within them. They are the three biggest black hat hacking governments in the world. Penetrating Israel's security requires a great deal of computer and hacking power. This was not a high schooler having a good time and winning a bet. After ascertaining that it was Iran, Israel responded. On May 9th, the Iranian port of Shahid Raja'i, the terminal was totally halted. The entire region was launched into a state of chaos. This terminal, which is located on Bandar Adas, right near there, which is a coastal city on the Straits of Hormuz, the entire city literally blocked out. Lights, traffic lights, all stopped. Lines of traffic for tens of miles of trucks coming into the port stopped. The hack was reported in the Washington Post. There were photos showing miles and miles of trucks that were stuck in ships that were kept waiting in the port because the whole place ground to a halt. The newspaper quoted sources saying that Israel was responsible for the hack. The sources themselves said that Israel hacked Iran as a response to Iran's failed hack on the national Israeli water system. It wasn't failed, it was partially successful. One of the sources, a foreign security expert, is quoted as saying the hack was presumably in retaliation for an earlier attempt to penetrate computers that operate rural water distribution systems in Israel. There was total disarray, and the attack was highly accurate. Israel's years ago, you should know that with the assistance of the United States, Israel, and probably the United States together, here's the problem because it's all a question mark, created what was called Stuxnet. It was a virus that had several successive viruses that followed. It was very successful, and it was a cyber attack against Iran. Stuxnet and its viruses successfully infiltrated Iranian computers and significantly sent back their nuclear program. In those attacks, no one was hurt. Computers attacked computers. The battlefield was cyberspace. The warriors were bots. The command post was a remote location. This attack against Israel's water system was different. This attack could have caused the deaths of countless people countless Israelis. What it did is it changed the entire field of war. It took cyber warfare to a new level. And Israel is trying to put the genie back in the bottle and force Iran back into the set of rules that leaves innocent people out of the line of cyber war. The former head of Israeli military intelligence, Amos Yadlin, warned Iran. He did it on Israeli radio. Yadlin warned Iran not to attack civilian targets. He pointed out that Iran was much more vulnerable than Israel. These alarming attacks were devastating because it changed the way in which we view cyber war. Israel is hoping that Iran receives their message, hoping that Iran will bring an end to this latest round of cyber warfare. They're hoping that this situation does not escalate or de-escalate. There are alarming events, there's no doubt. The levels to which cyber warfare have been taken are stuff that thriller movies and science fiction novels are made of. But this actually is real life, and that scares me. Nowadays, no matter what we're doing or planning or speaking about, our lives cannot be separated from COVID-19. It has changed the world. Israel's expert on the spread of COVID-19 is a character named Eli Waxman. He has clearly explained how to stop the rise in cases now that Israel has opened up. Obviously, when Israel, or for that matter, any other society, opens after having been shut down for a pandemic, there will be some reinfections. If the reinfections get out of hand, the country will need to shut down again. That's not a second wave. That's reinfections of the first wave, and that's important to distinguish. To stop COVID-19 from spreading and resulting in a second shutdown, Waxman says that there are three essential things that need to be done, and time is essential. In other words, essential means within 48 hours, this is what needs to be done. Three things: test, trace, isolate. Again, test, trace, and isolate. And Waxman says that you need, and you only have 48 hours to accomplish this, or it all breaks down again. Test. That means you immediately find people who have the symptoms, test them immediately. Trace. You have to have everyone who's, every patient, every single patient contacted, who was in contact with this patient needs to be tested. You need to trace them, all their actions, and all the people that were in contact with them for 14 days, and test them. Isolate those people immediately, even before the results come back. If it takes 5 days, the country will inevitably go back to lockdown. After 5 days, just 5 days, not 2, but 5, the first patient will have infected a maximum number of people that they will infect. And the other patients will also have infected the maximum people that they will infect. By 6 days, by day number 6, thousands upon thousands of people will have been infected. It sounds easy, but it's not so simple to find this, to do the three things. Israel can follow this plan more easily than other countries because they have employed the technology of the Mossad. They're spy masters. Spy technology takes cell phones of the infected patients and goes back in history for 14 days. It then sends a text message to anyone who comes in contact with the patient, anyone who came in contact with the patient, and informs them to quarantine themselves for 14 days. Like in so many other arenas, Israel can do what most countries cannot. Coming up, points of view. First up is an editorial from the Jerusalem Post. Remember, an editorial is written by the editorial board. It is the opinion of the paper. It is unsigned. Normally, the board sits around the table and discusses their point of view, and then one person is designated from around the table to write the unsigned editorial by the end of the day, to go in the next day's paper. In today's day and age, the editorial board will conference call or Zoom or Google Group or something like that, and then someone composes the piece. It then, by the way, gets put up almost immediately by the end of the first day, not waiting to the next day's paper, obviously, because everything's online today. An editorial always expresses a strong point of view. The editorial is a vehicle for the editors to teach their readers and influence leaders and politicians. It is a product of collective wisdom and not simply the opinion of one person or one person's idea. The editorial is a tool. It is how one can evaluate the position and political point of view of the newspaper. Now, this editorial from the Jerusalem Post is dated June 1st, 2020. It is entitled, "The Government Can't Fight Coronavirus Without Violating Rights of Citizens." It's exactly connected to what I was just talking about in terms of tracing and tracking and isolating people. The, the editorial is subtitled, and it's a long subtitle, you could do this online. Yair Lapid, "It makes no sense to give the government such widespread powers for a period of 10 months." That's Yair Lapid speaking in terms of that. It's a quote. The subtitle is a quote. Here is how it begins. As Israel's state of emergency over coronavirus pandemic declared by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu 3 months ago draws to an end, the new government has released a memorandum for legislation designed to extend its powers another 10 months. Under this bill, the basic rights of Israelis, from freedom of movement to privacy, may be violated at any time the government decides new measures are necessary to contain the spread of the virus. The editors will explain the bill, and when they do explain the bill, they raise important questions, the editors are, about individual rights and democracy. It's called the Corona Bill or the Corona Law, and they quote from the bill in the next section of their editorial. Now, what happens is the editors explain exactly what disturbs them, and here I'm quoting from the editors. In a memorandum circulated to the cabinet ministers over the weekend, ahead of the bill's presentation to Knesset, the Prime Minister's office said, due to the imminent expiration of the emergency regulations, quote, and here's the bill here, the need has arisen to establish a legal alternative for critical emergency arrangements to allow the battle against the virus to last beyond a 3-month period. The new measures would be valid through March 31st, 2021, to provide the government with the tools to protect public health, including during the danger of a wider spread of the virus anticipated next winter. The editors then quote Yair Lapid, which was a part of the subtitle, the head of the opposition, and he explains the following. He says that this bill is a violation of civil rights, they write, but the opposition leader Yair Lapid warned that the legislation could be used in nefarious ways. Quote, it makes no sense to give the government such widespread powers for a period of 10 months, he said. Again quoting, this includes Shin Bet, Israel's security agency, tracking and a possible ban on demonstrations that it finds uncomfortable, unquote. Now, this is me speaking now, and I'm going to say the point the editors are making is extremely sound and very clear. A state of emergency is important. Protecting and enduring the safety of people is essential, but 10 months is a very long time. Here's how the editors conclude. In this spirit, we urge the Knesset to thoroughly deliberate this legislation and to carefully balance the need to protect Israelis from coronavirus while preserving their rights, including to privacy. While the Knesset must allow the government the freedom to take action to curb the spread of the virus, it cannot allow it to indiscriminately curb the freedom of its citizens. I think the Jerusalem Post editors are wise to urge the government to slow down. It's an important issue because it is extremely dangerous, especially because it is possible that during the debate about whether to do this, curb the individual citizen's rights, a better medical invention or many inventions may emerge to make the bill curtailing civil rights less of an emergency. Next up is a column from Ynet. It was published on May 31st. It was written by Smadar Perry. Smadar Perry is one of the leading writers on Arab affairs, not just in Israel, but around the world. She's always insightful and gives spectacular perspective on what's happening in the Arab world. And with that comes the ability to predict future events and movements. The piece is entitled Nasrallah's Problems Keep Mounting. And the subtitle is a whole paragraph. So here's the subtitle. Between the battle against coronavirus and Lebanon's crippling economic crisis, Nasrallah is losing his grip. His part in the organization diminishes, and operational decisions, if there are any in these times, are made by Iran. This is how she begins. Half a year after assuming the position of Prime Minister, Lebanon's Hassan Diab visited the United Nations peacekeepers in the country's south near the border with Israel last Wednesday. The visit did not surprise Israel, which decided not to interfere. Perry explains that the Lebanese government is linked to Hezbollah, that essentially Hezbollah is in charge of Lebanon. She continues this way. Diab, calm and calculated in his words, cited United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which brought the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war to an end, and claimed his country safeguards the sovereignty of both nations. Diab did not mention Hezbollah's repeated violations and immediately accused Israel of relentlessly trying to shake up his country's stability. Perry lays out the reality of the situation. She writes, "This is how it works. A day before the Prime Minister's visit, Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah accused Israel and the United States of pressuring UN peacekeeper UNIFIL to further expand its mandate in southern Lebanon. Nasrallah essentially said that Hezbollah doesn't care about UNIFIL's involvement and will keep protecting Lebanon against Israeli takeover attempts. Hezbollah's strongest presence, through armed guards and agents in civilian clothing, is set at Beirut International Airport. No one can come in and out without their identity checked by the terror group, and anyone whose name sets off a red flag is in for trouble. Hezbollah is looking for Israeli agents or envoys, as well as a host of other foreign figures against whom interrogation warrants have been issued." But Perry reminds us, Hezbollah faces a dilemma. They need money and medical aid. Remember, Corona is at stake here, right? So they are in a very difficult situation, and they know it. And this is how she puts it. However, Lebanon is in dire need of financial aid, and the situation is only worsening due to coronavirus outbreak. Tens of thousands of newly unemployed civilians took to the streets to protest against the government and the political echelon's corruption. And now she explains and concludes that Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, is losing control and losing it to Iran because he needs their help. And in exchange for their help, he yields that control to Tehran. That's where the problem is. She writes, and this is her conclusion, between the battle against the virus and economic crisis, Nasrallah has been losing his grip. His part in the organization diminishes, and operational decisions, if there are any in these times, have been made by Iran. This is great insight. It's all happening right on Israel's border. It shows how Iran is encroaching and gaining control literally on Israel's border. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 4 cartoons today. I just want to make you smile, actually. They're not necessarily germane to everything that we're talking about. There are some not to anything we're talking about. They're just going to make you smile. Sometimes we need to smile. And so these cartoons are comical, an interlude in a very tough and difficult period of history. And this history, by the way, is extending for a very long time. So it will be part of our memory, I hope, but it is what it is. The first is by Gary Varvel, and it's called COVID-19 Guidelines. 3 scientists in the CDC are huddled around the magic 8-ball. You remember the magic 8-ball? It was a silly ball that kids love, and you would shake it and ask it a question, and it would predict the future. So that's what they did. The scientists are shaking the ball, and they ask, masks or no masks? The 8-ball's response is, it says, reply hazy, try again. Everyone has been in the situation of not knowing what the recommendations are telling us. Should we not? It's like the silly child's game of pulling petals off of a flower, saying loves me not, loves me not. Second cartoon is by Michael Ramirez. It's entitled Nursing Homes Inc. Employment Office. Death in the form of the Grim Reaper is sitting and applying for a job at a nursing home. They, the human resources person, HR, is reading his application and says, I see you have listed the New York Governor Cuomo as a reference. Now, that is funny on the one hand, but it's also very, very sad at the same time. The situation with the elderly in New York nursing homes was tragic beyond words. And it was not helped by New York's governor. Sometimes if we don't laugh, we won't stop crying. Third up is a picture of a wedding. It's from Powerline blog. 9 people are gathered together and with the bride and groom. Each of the 7 groomsmen is wearing a different, very bold, bright color. In total, there are 9 colors, and the caption reads, "When your wedding is sponsored by Sherwin-Williams." We end with a big tune just to make you laugh. A very scary, very real-looking shark is photoshopped onto a rock in a lake. The caption reads, "Someone painted this rock." In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Russian President Vladimir Putin has instructed his defense minister to get approval from Syria for Russia to expand their military foundations there. Truth is, it's really simple, a pro forma request. Syria can't say no, obviously. Russia already has 2 very large permanent positions in Syria. In Latakia, they have one. It's an air base. And in Tartus, they have one, which is a huge naval base. Putin wants to expand these bases and probably wants to build new ones also. Putin knows what he's doing. Now, one of the interesting and important components of this is that the Russians have been in Syria and building these things since 2015, 5 years. The Russians are committed to the stability in Syria, and they are securing Bashar Assad, President Bashar Assad's position there. Without Russia, Assad would have fallen. It's as simple as that. For this reason, Russia will get permission to build and expand within Syria, even though you should note that Iran wants to do the same. The rest of us must carefully watch the interplay between Russia and Syria and Iran from the back end. Syria is the best place for Russia to be if they want to monitor the goings-on in the Middle East and play a pivotal role in the future of the Middle East. It is a perfect place for them to monitor everything that transpires in the region. Iran passed a law making it illegal for anyone in Iran to use any Israeli technology. This is a blessing, you should know. That includes software and technology, even spyware. It includes waves, by the way. The law reads, and this is a quote from the law, "confronting the hostile acts of the Zionist regime against peace and security." They call it the Zionist regime, obviously not Israel. Now, Fars, which is an official Iranian media outlet, quoted the bill, and I'm quoting here again, "Any cooperation or spying for the Zionists is equal to enmity towards Allah and corruption on earth." The Iranian bill spoke of Israel's sanctions and warmongering and terrorist moves in the siege of Gaza and settlement construction, displacing the Palestinian people, occupation of other countries, including the Golan Heights, unquote. Interestingly, the Grand Ayatollah Shirazi, which is the second or third highest person in religious affairs in Iran, recently was asked if it was permissible to use a vaccine against COVID-19 if it was developed in Israel. His answer was yes. It was permissible if there was no alternative medicine. But he also said that, quote, "it is not permissible to buy and sell anything from the Zionists." Israel's clandestine Mossad, translated as the agency, secured miraculous amounts of supplies to fight coronavirus. Listen to these numbers, and these are only partial numbers. 80 million masks, the Mossad got, 30 tons of disinfectant lotion, 10,000 respirators, 8 million goggles were procured. 142 million more masks are scheduled to arrive in the next few months. 142 million more masks. Many of the supplies were made in China. Some were both made in and came from China, but most of the supplies were procured from countries that do not have diplomatic relations with Israel. That's why the Mossad did it and not the foreign ministry. Do you understand? How could this happen? It happened because the Mossad, unlike the foreign ministry, has deep relations and interactions with people, both in government and outside of government positions in these countries. These contacts were developed in order to unite against Iran. And because of those relationships, the Mossad was able to secure all the protective gear for Israel. Iran has been supporting Bashar Assad in Syria for a very long time, since the very start of the civil war there over a decade ago. Iranian costs for the involvement in Syria comes to $30 billion. That's a lot of money. That's the total cost over 10 years, over a decade. That number comes from a character named Hasmastrala Falahastisha, an outgoing member of the Iranian Parliament's Security and Foreign Policy Committee, so he would know he allocated the money. He's quoted in Etemad, which is a newspaper and an official government outlet. Now, this is important just in terms of understanding numbers. The number $30 billion is twice as large as Iran's annual defense budget. Twice as large as their annual defense budget. It's 6.5% of their gross domestic product, their GDP. In addition to supporting Assad with military assistance, Iran also helped by providing oil and cash. They also lent advisors and consultants. In exchange for their help in Syria, Iran has built a port in Syria and has received a major stake in Syrian telecommunications monopoly. Helping and defending Syria was an investment for Iran. Their biggest return is a land bridge connecting Iran to the Mediterranean Sea, and that's worth every cent of the 10 years and $30 billion. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one picante piece of information. Did you know that almost everyone is intrigued by spy stories and novels and movies? I mentioned the Mossad several times in today's discussion. They're Israel's spy agency. Every country has their own clandestine services. That's what they're officially called, clandestine services. Movies and books make it sound very exciting, but in actuality, most of the missions and jobs are boring. Most spies analyze and read and write reports. Not very romantic at all. There are very, very few real spies, and in this day and age, none. There are very few operations like those daredevil operations of the past. Gone are the days of James Bond and the likes. Today, most operations that actually require people instead of computers, most are computerized. These operations are compartmentalized. People on an operation perform only one single task in the puzzle. Planning is everything. It's a puzzle that fits together. When you compartmentalize an op or an operation, it can never actually go wrong. It simply is incomplete and can be picked up later. The people involved in the operation only know one tiny bit of the op, their task, and they have no idea of the larger picture. If caught, there is no way to trace back to the source of the original sponsoring country or company. Company is important here because, in fact, rather than military, most ops today are industrial espionage. Companies stealing and stopping from their competitors and getting an edge. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.